What would you do if someone tried to remove you from your own first-class seat just because they thought you didn't belong there? On this flight, a man demanded that a black woman be moved from seat 2A. He said he expected a certain standard. He didn't want to sit next to her. The cabin went silent. Passengers watched. The tension was thick. But minutes later, everything changed. Because the woman he tried to humiliate wasn't just another passenger. She was the CEO of the very aviation company that owned the airline. And when the captain walked down the aisle to personally greet her, the man's confidence vanished. This isn't just a story about power. It's a story about respect, assumptions, and a lesson delivered at 30,000 feet. Stay with me, because what happened next changed everyone on that plane forever. The cabin lights glowed softly as passengers settled into their seats, the low hum of the aircraft blending with quiet conversations and the rustle of luggage being tucked away. Business travelers typed final emails on their laptops. Families arranged carry-ons in overhead bins, and flight attendants moved smoothly down the aisle with practiced smiles. In seat 2A sat a calm, well-dressed black woman named Vanessa Cole. She wore a simple navy suit tailored perfectly, her hair neatly styled, her posture confident yet relaxed. A leather portfolio rested on her lap. She had boarded without fanfare, greeting the crew warmly, as if she were a frequent flyer who valued courtesy over attention. She glanced out the window briefly, watching ground crew members move with precision. Flying had always fascinated her, the coordination, the discipline, the quiet teamwork behind every successful takeoff. She took a slow breath, appreciating the stillness before departure. Moments later, a tall white passenger stopped abruptly beside her row. His name was Richard Lawson, dressed in an expensive gray suit, phone pressed to his ear. He looked irritated even before speaking. He ended his call, checked his boarding pass, then looked at Vanessa with narrowed eyes. "You're in the wrong seat," he said sharply, not bothering to lower his voice. Vanessa calmly checked her ticket, her movements unhurried. "No, sir," she replied evenly. "This is 2A. Richard frowned, glancing again at his pass. "That's my seat." She turned the ticket slightly so he could see it. "We're seated together. You're 2B. His jaw tightened. "I paid for this seat," he said louder this time. "I don't want to sit next to you. Ask the attendant to move you." The words seemed to freeze the air around them. Nearby passengers fell silent. A woman across the aisle paused mid-sentence. A man 2 rows back slowly lowered his newspaper. The shift in atmosphere was impossible to ignore. A flight attendant approached quickly, sensing tension. "Is there a problem?" she asked politely, keeping her tone neutral. "Yes," Richard replied, gesturing dismissively toward Vanessa. "I want her moved. I need space." Vanessa remained composed, her hands folded neatly over her portfolio. "I'm comfortable here," she said. "This is my assigned seat." The attendant hesitated. She had handled seat mix-ups before, but this felt different. There was no confusion about boarding passes. The issue was something else entirely. "Sir," the attendant began carefully, "all first-class seats offer the same space and amenities." Richard exhaled sharply. "That's not the point." Whispers began to ripple quietly through the cabin. Some passengers looked uncomfortable. Others looked angry. A few simply stared, waiting to see what would happen next. Vanessa's expression didn't change. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she met Richard's gaze calmly, as if measuring not his words, but his character. "I'm not moving," she said gently but firmly. The attendant shifted her weight, clearly unsure how to defuse the situation without escalating it. Richard shook his head in disbelief. Unbelievable. He stepped into the aisle, creating a small blockage, clearly expecting someone to fix what he believed was a problem. But what Richard didn't know was that this wasn't just another passenger he was speaking to. Vanessa Cole was not someone who could be dismissed or displaced. And within minutes, everyone on that plane would understand exactly why. Richard crossed his arms tightly across his chest, his jaw set with impatience. "Look, I travel first class often," he said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby rows. "I expect a certain standard." The words hung heavy in the air, sharper than he likely intended, or perhaps exactly as sharp as he meant them to be. Vanessa met his eyes calmly, her expression steady and unshaken. "And I expect respect," she replied, her tone even and controlled. A few passengers nearby exchanged glances. One older gentleman gave a small nod of agreement. A woman across the aisle suddenly murmured, "Exactly," under her breath. The flight attendant, maintaining her professionalism, stepped slightly between them in a gentle attempt to ease the tension. "Sir," she said politely, "all seats in first class offer the same service and space. Perhaps we can all get settled, so we can depart on time." Richard let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Unbelievable. He dropped into seat 2B with visible frustration, but didn't buckle his seatbelt. Instead, he pressed the call button above him again, once, then twice, as if summoning someone higher up to handle what he clearly viewed as an unacceptable situation. Several heads turned. Vanessa, however, did something unexpected. Rather than continuing the argument, she reached into her purse and calmly took out her phone. She typed a brief message, just a few words, before locking the screen and placing it back on her lap. Her breathing remained slow. Her posture remained composed. There was no anger in her movements, only quiet confidence. The low hum of the aircraft grew louder as the doors closed. A few moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We'll be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience and cooperation." Richard leaned back with a scoff, clearly unsatisfied. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. Vanessa simply gazed forward. Minutes passed. The cabin crew completed final checks. Overhead bins clicked shut. The last few passengers hurried down the aisle. Then something unusual happened. Instead of preparing for immediate pushback, the lead flight attendant reappeared at the front of the cabin. But this time, her demeanor had subtly shifted. Her posture was more formal, her smile more deliberate. She approached seat 2A directly, leaning slightly toward Vanessa. She spoke in a respectful, almost deferential tone. "Ma'am, the captain would like to greet you personally before takeoff." The words were soft, but unmistakable. Several nearby passengers heard them clearly. Richard's expression changed instantly. The irritation in his face gave way to confusion. "Why?" he muttered, unable to hide his curiosity. Vanessa turned her head slightly toward him, offering a small, knowing smile. "It's routine," she said gently. But it wasn't routine at all. Captains didn't usually leave the cockpit to greet individual passengers moments before departure, especially not without a special reason. The lead flight attendant stood patiently, waiting. Vanessa unbuckled her seatbelt gracefully and rose from her seat. As she did, her presence seemed to fill the aisle, not in arrogance, but in quiet authority. Passengers leaned slightly to watch. Richard's earlier confidence was beginning to fade. His eyes followed her as she stepped forward, walking toward the front of the aircraft with calm assurance. He didn't understand what was happening, but deep down he sensed something important. And within moments, the reason behind the captain's unusual request would turn his certainty completely upside down. Before the plane pushed back from the gate, something completely unexpected happened. The cockpit door opened. Instead of preparing silently for departure, the captain himself stepped out and began walking down the aisle. His uniform was crisp, his expression calm but purposeful. Conversations faded mid-sentence as passengers noticed him moving past the rows. Captains rarely left the cockpit at this stage of boarding. Passengers straightened in surprise. He walked past row 1. Then he stopped at seat 2A. "Miss Cole," he said warmly, extending his hand with genuine respect. "It's an honor to have you on board today." The cabin fell silent. You could almost hear the hum of the engines more clearly in the sudden stillness. Vanessa rose gracefully from her seat and shook his hand. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate the warm welcome." Her voice was composed, familiar, like this wasn't the first time she had been greeted this way. Richard blinked, confusion spreading across his face. His earlier confidence seemed to evaporate as he looked from Vanessa to the captain and back again. The captain turned slightly, speaking clearly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We're proud to serve the CEO of Cole Aviation Holdings." A ripple moved through the cabin. Some passengers gasped quietly. Others exchanged wide-eyed looks. A woman across the aisle whispered, Did he say CEO? The name carried weight. Cole Aviation Holdings was the parent company that owned this airline, along with several others operating across the country. It oversaw cargo divisions, pilot academies, and aircraft maintenance operations. The company had recently made headlines for expanding internationally and investing heavily in modern fleet technology. Vanessa wasn't just another passenger in first class. She ran the aviation company. Richard's face drained of color. His mind raced back to his words just minutes earlier. I expect a certain standard. I want her moved. The irony pressed down on him like cabin pressure. Vanessa had built the company from the ground up. After earning degrees in aerospace engineering and business management, she had started as a junior analyst in a struggling regional airline. She had spent time in aircraft hangars learning maintenance operations, sat inside flight simulators to understand pilot training, and worked late nights negotiating contracts that eventually saved the company from bankruptcy. She hadn't inherited power. She had earned it. Over the years, her leadership transformed the business into a respected aviation group known for innovation, safety, and diversity in hiring. Industry magazines had praised her forward-thinking strategies. Employees respected her hands-on leadership style. And today, she had chosen to fly quietly, without announcement, without a corporate entourage, just like any other traveler. The captain continued respectfully, "If you need anything at all, our crew is at your service." Vanessa smiled politely. "I'm simply here to observe and enjoy the flight." Observe. The single word carried deeper meaning now. She wasn't here for luxury. She was here to see how things truly operated when no one expected her presence. Richard swallowed hard. Suddenly, the seat beside him felt smaller. The woman he had tried to remove wasn't just qualified to sit there. She owned the airline that placed him in that seat. Around them, the mood in the cabin had completely shifted. What began as whispers of discomfort had turned into quiet admiration. The captain gave a final nod. "We're honored to have you, ma'am." With that, he returned toward the cockpit. Vanessa settled back into seat 2A calmly, fastening her seatbelt as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed, and sitting beside her, Richard now understood that he had made a very public mistake, one that would stay with him far longer than this flight. The aircraft finally took off, engines roaring as the runway blurred beneath them. Within seconds, the city lights grew smaller, fading into patterns of gold and white. Inside the cabin, the earlier tension seemed to rise with the plane, lingering quietly between seats 2A and 2B. Richard stared straight ahead as the seatbelt sign remained on. His confident posture from earlier was gone. In its place was stiffness, uncertainty. The steady hum of the engines filled the silence between them. After a few quiet minutes, he cleared his throat. I didn't realize," he said softly, barely turning his head. Vanessa shifted her gaze from the window and looked at him. Her expression was steady, composed, but not cold. "You didn't realize what?" she asked gently. He hesitated, searching for words that didn't feel shallow. "Who you were." Vanessa held his gaze for a moment before responding. "That's the point," she said calmly. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with dignity." The words didn't come with anger. They came with clarity. They struck deeper than any public embarrassment could have. Around them, passengers pretended to scroll through phones or flip magazine pages, but every ear was tuned in. The conversation had become more than personal. It felt like a quiet lesson unfolding at 30,000 feet. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He loosened his tie slightly, as if the air had grown thinner. "I apologize," he said, this time more firmly, "for my behavior." Vanessa studied him, not suspiciously, but thoughtfully. She had seen apologies before. Some were offered out of fear, others from pride wounded by exposure. She searched his face for sincerity. "Thank you," she said after a pause. "I accept your apology. But remember this, respect shouldn't depend on titles, wealth, or position." Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was firm, powerful. Richard nodded slowly. For the first time since boarding, he seemed quiet not from frustration, but from reflection. As the seatbelt sign turned off, the flight attendants resumed service with their usual professionalism. Drinks were offered. Warm towels were handed out. Smiles were genuine and consistent, just as they had been before anyone knew who Vanessa was. Vanessa noticed everything. How the attendant addressed elderly passengers with extra patience. How a young crew member double-checked a special meal request without being asked. How the cabin manager discreetly assisted a nervous flyer across the aisle. She wasn't observing with authority. She was observing with care. Her company's success had always depended on the details, the small moments that shaped a passenger's experience. And those moments couldn't be measured in stock prices or corporate reports. They were measured in human interaction. Richard watched her occasionally, curiosity replacing discomfort. "You really came to observe?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "The only way to understand your company is to experience it like everyone else." He absorbed that. Throughout the flight, Vanessa never requested special treatment. She didn't ask for upgrades, didn't summon crew members unnecessarily, didn't remind anyone of her position. She didn't move seats. She didn't assert power. She simply remained where she belonged, confident, grounded, equal. And somewhere over the clouds, a man who once demanded space beside her began to understand that true leadership doesn't need to announce itself. It earns respect by giving it first. As the plane began its descent, the mood inside the cabin felt noticeably different from the one at takeoff. The earlier tension had dissolved, replaced by a quiet sense of reflection. Outside the windows, the clouds parted to reveal the city below, glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. The landing gear lowered with a steady mechanical hum. When the wheels finally touched the runway, the aircraft glided smoothly along the pavement before slowing to a gentle stop. A few passengers began clapping softly, not just for the skillful landing, but for the unexpected lesson they had witnessed unfold midair. It hadn't been loud. It hadn't been dramatic, but it had been powerful. As the plane taxied toward the gate, the captain's voice returned over the intercom, calm and professional. He thanked everyone for flying and extended a special note of appreciation to Ms. Cole for choosing their airline. When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers rose from their seats, retrieving luggage and forming the usual aisle line. Yet the energy felt different. Some offered Vanessa respectful smiles as they passed. A few gave small nods of admiration. Richard remained seated for a moment, waiting. When it was his turn to step into the aisle, he paused beside her. His voice was quieter than it had been at boarding, less certain, more thoughtful. "I have a daughter," he said sincerely. "I hope she grows up to have your strength." Vanessa looked up at him, her expression warm but steady. "Then teach her to treat everyone with fairness," she replied gently. "Strength begins there." He nodded, absorbing the simplicity of her words. "No titles required," she added softly. He gave a small, humbled smile before moving forward with the line. As Vanessa stepped off the plane into the jet bridge, several crew members were waiting discreetly nearby. The lead flight attendant thanked her not just for flying, but for her leadership. Under Vanessa's guidance, Cole Aviation Holdings had transformed its corporate culture. The airline had increased diversity in hiring at every level, from ground crew to executive offices. It had invested in advanced pilot training programs to ensure safety remained the highest priority. Customer service standards had been redesigned to emphasize empathy and professionalism. But those changes hadn't come from boardroom speeches alone. They came from moments like this. Moments of observation, moments of accountability, moments where leadership quietly watched, learned, and improved. Vanessa never needed to announce her power. She never needed to remind anyone of her title. Her authority didn't depend on recognition. Her presence spoke for itself. As she walked through the terminal, blending once again into the crowd of ordinary travelers, she carried herself the same way she had in seat 2A, calm, composed, grounded. And somewhere in that first-class cabin, a man reflected on how quickly assumptions can expose character. Because assumptions can cost more than any plane ticket. They can cost respect. They can cost dignity. They can cost growth. But they can also teach, if someone is willing to learn. True authority doesn't shout. It doesn't demand space. It doesn't rely on status. It sits calmly in seat 2A and waits for respect. If you enjoyed this powerful story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more inspiring moments that remind us all why respect matters, no matter who's sitting next to you.